Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're zeroing in on a market that maybe doesn't get the spotlight too often, but is pretty significant. Petroleum coke.
That's right. We've got a market report here looking at some, well, substantial growth figures.
Yeah, really substantial. It's projecting a jump from, what is it, about 26.8 billion US dollars in 2025?
2614.5 million to be precise.
Right, up to potentially 51.5 billion by 2033. That's an 8.5% compound annual growth rate. Pretty hefty.
It really is. And for anyone listening who isn't totally familiar, petroleum coke or pet coke is essentially a byproduct of oil refining.
The solid stuff left over.
Exactly. Carbon rich. Used mainly as fuel, but also in various industrial processes.
Okay, and our plan for this deep dive is to unpack this market report, right? Pull out the key insights, figure out what's driving this growth, maybe find some surprises.
Definitely. And one thing that jumps out immediately is how different the picture looks depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah, the regional variations seem quite stark. So let's start big picture then. Globally, we've confirmed that 2025 number, roughly 26.8 billion.
Correct. And the target for 2033 is that 51.5 billion mark. The 8.5% CAGR shows clear upward momentum overall.
So where's the biggest piece of that action right now?
That would be North America. They hold over 40% of the global revenue currently.
Wow, 40%.
Yeah. For 2025, their market size is estimated at about $9.9 billion.
USD, 921.37 million, the report says, and growing at 7.0% CGR through 2033.
That's the projection.
And within North America, I assume the U.S. is the leader.
Absolutely. Around $7.8 billion USD, 827.96 million in 2025, growing slightly slower, though, at 6.8%.
And the report links that to electricity demand.
It does. Growing demand for power. Pet coke is often used in thermal power plants, sometimes as a cheaper alternative to coal, you know?
Makes sense. What about Canada and Mexico?
Canada's interesting, a bit smaller, around 1.2 billion in 2025, but a faster growth rate forecasted at 7.8%. They seem focused on cost-effective energy. And Mexico's also solid, about 900 million US dollars in 2025, growing at 7.5%.
All right. Let's hop across the pond to Europe. There's the second biggest chunk.
They are over 30% of global revenue, about 7.8 billion USD, 776.21 million in 2025. And their projected growth is 7.5% CAGR.
Similar overall growth to North America then. Any standouts within Europe?
Well, the UK shows strong growth potential, 8.3% CAGR. The report points to energy efficiency and cost benefits there. Their 2025 market is about 1.3 billion.
Interesting.
Germany's also significant, over 1.5 billion in 2025 and growing at 7.7%. Could be linked to their industrial base, maybe population factors too.
And then you have other major players like Russia, Italy, France, Spain, all showing steady growth in the 6-7% range.
Exactly. Consistent demand across the board in Europe, it seems.
Okay, now let's pivot to the region that seems to be, well, really accelerating. Asia Pacific.
APAC.
Yes, this is where things get really dynamic.
They hold about 23% of the revenue now, right?
Right.
Roughly 6.4 billion US dollars in 2025.
Correct. USD 604.35.48 million. But the key figure here is the growth rate. 11.3% CAGR, projected from 2025 to 2033. That's fast, the highest globally.
By a significant margin, it's really driving the global average up.
So what's fueling that in APAC? China, I assume, is a major factor.
Absolutely. China leads the region, about $2.7 billion market in 2025, and a projected 10.8% CAGR.
And the report links this to crop yields. That's interesting.
It is. It likely relates to energy use and fertilizer production, perhaps ammonia, crucial for feeding a large population and boosting agriculture.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's India. Even faster growth.
India's CAGR is projected at a very impressive 13.2%. Their 2025 market is smaller, around 640 million US dollars, but that growth trajectory is steep. Again, links to agriculture I mentioned.
Fascinating connection. And Japan and South Korea are also growing strongly.
Yes, Japan around 9.8% CAGR, South Korea at 10.4%. Significant markets, both around 900 million USD in 2025. It paints a picture of broad industrial and agricultural demand pulling pet coke consumption up across APAC.
So APAC is clearly the engine room for growth. Okay, let's move to South America. How do they fit in?
South America accounts for just over 5% of global revenue, about $1 billion in 2025.
USD 1018.95 million.
Right. And their growth is strong too, projected at 9.2% CAGR.
Higher than North America and Europe.
Yes. Brazil is the key player there, Around 436 million market size in 2025 and a 9.8% CAGR, linked to their growing industrial base and energy needs.
And Argentina. Also strong growth.
Very strong, 10.1% CAGR. Interestingly, the report connects this to a focus on cleaner energy solutions, maybe hinting at demand for lower sulfur grades.
Could be. And then Colombia, Peru, Chile showing decent growth from smaller bases too.
That's right, consistent growth across the region.
Okay, how about the Middle East? Smaller share, but looks like strong growth too.
Yeah, around 2% of global revenue, about $1.1 billion in 2025. But their CAGR is high, 9.8%.
And what's driving that? Construction.
Exactly. The report explicitly links it to demand for building materials like steel and aluminum. Huge infrastructure and real estate projects, especially in places like Saudi Arabia.
The report mentions over 5,000 projects worth something like $819 billion in Saudi Arabia. That's staggering.
It is. That level of construction requires vast amounts of cement, steel, aluminum, all potentially using petcoke in their production.
So that explains the demand. UAE also growing fast.
Yes, UAE at 10.3% CAGR, and strong growth also seen in Saudi Arabia itself, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, all benefiting from this regional trend.
Finally, Africa. Smallest share currently.
Around 1%, just under $600 million market in 2025.
USD, $589.92 million, but still growing quite well.
Yes, 8.8% CAGR projected. This is tied to rising industrialization and general energy demands as economies develop.
South Africa and Nigeria mentioned specifically.
As key contributors, yes. So overall, a global growth story, but really fascinating variations in pace and drivers region by region.
Definitely. Okay, so we got the geography. Let's talk about the product itself. The report breaks it down by type. Fuel-grade coke is dominant.
Yes, by far. Its main appeal is its high calorific value, lots of energy packed in, and it's often cheaper than coal.
So, ideal for power plants, cement kilns, high-energy users.
Precisely. Cost effectiveness is key there.
But the fastest-growing segment is calcined coke. Why the rapid growth there?
That's tied directly to the aluminum and steel industries. Calcination is a process that basically purifies the petcoke, raises the carbon content, removes volatiles.
Makes it suitable for specific uses.
Exactly. It's essential for making the anodes used in aluminum smelting. So as aluminum demand grows, driven by automotive, aerospace, construction, the demand for calcined coke grows with it. Same logic applies to certain steel applications.
Got it. So fuel grade leads now on volume and energy cost, but calcined is growing faster because it's tied to these booming material sectors.
Yeah.
What about end use? Where does it all go? Cement is number one.
That's right. The construction boom we talked about, especially in emerging economies, drives cement demand. And cement production is incredibly energy intensive. Fuel-grade pet coke fits the bill.
And the second fastest growing end use.
Power plants, again, reinforcing its role as an energy source for electricity generation. We saw that driving demand in the U.S. earlier.
Right. And other uses include calcining itself, blast furnaces for steel, and some others. Okay, so we've seen the where and the what. Let's talk why. What are the big market drivers according to the report?
Well, number one is the global increase in steel production. More steel needs more inputs, including sometimes pet coke.
Makes sense. And the infrastructure boom.
That's another huge one. Roads, bridges, buildings,
Yeah.
all need cement and steel. We saw how that plays out in the Middle East, but it's global.
And surprisingly, environmental regulations are listed as a driver. How does that work?
Seems counterintuitive. Yeah, you'd think regulations would be a restraint. But sometimes, specific rules might favor, say, lower sulfur pet coke over higher sulfur coal in certain applications. So it can actually create demand for specific types of pet coke.
Ah, okay, so it's nuanced. But there are restraints, right? Environmental concerns must be a big one.
Absolutely. Emissions from burning pet coke, particularly sulfur dioxide and greenhouse gases, are a major concern. Stricter environmental policies globally could definitely limit its use, especially fuel grade.
And availability of raw materials.
The report mentions that. It might be less about the amount of pet coke since it's a refinery byproduct, and more about the quality or type, which depends heavily on the kind of crude oil being processed. Getting the right spec might be challenging sometimes.
Okay. Any interesting trends shaping the future?
There are a couple mentioned. One is a collaboration between Emirates Global Aluminium, EGA, and BP. They're looking into ways to reduce the carbon footprint associated with making calcined coke.
So industry is looking at sustainability.
It seems so. Proactive steps, which is interesting. The other major trend is investment in production capacity.
To meet this expected growth.
Exactly. The report highlights Indian Oil Corporation expanding several refineries. including pet coke processing. They aim to finish work in Panipat, Gujarat, and Baroni by late 2025, boosting capacity significantly at Baroni, for example.
Despite some delays and cost issues mentioned there.
Yes, those are noted, but the investment direction is clear. And ExxonMobil's big Beaumont refinery expansion in the U.S. is also mentioned successfully completed, adding a lot of capacity, which inherently increases potential pet coke output too.
So the big players are betting on continued demand and the competitive landscape. Lots
Yeah.
of players.
Very competitive. You've got the global oil majors like ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, Saudi Aramco, Valero, but also strong regional players like Reliance in India, SR Oil, Indian Oil Corp itself.
And their strategies are pretty standard. Good products, strong distribution, trying to innovate.
That's the picture painted, yes. Diversified portfolios, reliable supply chains, and keeping an eye on efficiency and potentially environmental performance improvements.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up,
Right.
we're looking at significant global growth for petroleum coke, really powered by that rapid expansion in Asia-Pacific.
Definitely. And driven by key sectors like cement, power, and especially the rising demand for aluminum and steel, which pulls that calcined coke segment along.
We've seen the drivers steel, infrastructure, even some regulatory nuances, but also the clear headwinds from environmental concerns.
And the trends towards tackling those concerns, like the EGA-BP collaboration alongside major capacity investments. It's a complex picture.
It really is much more dynamic than you might think at first glance.
Absolutely. The way regional economics, industrial needs, and environmental pressures all intersect here makes it a fascinating market to watch.
It certainly does, which kind of leads to a final thought maybe for you, our listener, to consider. Given those environmental pressures we've discussed and the strong growth trajectory, what kinds of innovations or maybe fundamental shifts do you think will be most impactful? How will that balance between economic importance and environmental impact play out for pet coke over the next decade? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.